can Americans across the country do? Do they care? Will the Mueller report change their minds about the president or their vote in 2020? Our team of reporters is asking those very questions across the nation. Garrett Hake in St. Petersburg, Florida, Ali Vitale in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Vaughn Hilliard in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Garrett, to you first. I know you've been speaking to voters in a very specific county, one that went for Obama twice, then they voted for Trump, who won by just 1% in 2016. What are people on the ground telling you there? And are they mentioning Russia at all? Because they have a chance to vote for a Democrat or a Republican. But we need to remind our audience of the first thing in the findings, that Russia interfered. Foreign interference affected the election and could affect the next one.
Steph, to the voters I talked to, that is background music. I talked to a lot of folks who were Obama, Trump voters, folks who tell me they are still on the fence about 2020. And there are issues that could swing their decision of who to vote for next year. But those issues do not include what Robert Mueller put on paper yesterday. The vast majority of folks I talked to yesterday said they know how they feel about this president. Folks who loved him before will love him still. Folks who did not like him before will only be reinforced in their views by this report. And some of the people I talked to said this is not the issue they want to hear the 2020 candidates talking about either. Here's a sampling of some of the folks we spoke to.
Whatever's factual, whatever's proven to be true, then that will obviously have a bearing on how I vote going forward.
Is there anything that Robert Mueller could put on paper that would make you say, I don't know?
No, because I don't believe half of what I read.
I'm more likely to support Trump today than I was at the original election.
That's interesting.
With Hillary, because, he's not a perfect guy. I think he's a despicable human being, but he's done a lot of good things for the country.
How do you think the Democrats have handled this whole process?
Nothing's getting done in Washington. They should go about their business and get legislation passed.
Stephanie, the most important soundbite of all that there to me was the guy who told me he thought the president was a despicable human being, but that he had done a lot of good for the country. What that tells me about how the 2020 Democrats should handle this, every minute they're talking about Robert Mueller is not a minute that they're talking about health care, education, immigration, the issues that these folks here in Florida told me they want to hear their candidates talking about.
Really? It makes me want to ask Republicans, is there not someone who isn't a despicable human being, but who can do a lot of good things? I mean, call me simple. Ali, I know you've been speaking to people in New Hampshire. What are they telling you?
Stephanie, I found yesterday in talking to a lot of these voters, and even today, there's relief that they've finally come to this point in the Mueller report coming out. But among democratically inclined voters, there is one more step I think that they would like to take, and that's hearing from Robert Mueller himself. I think across the board, in talking to Garrett and Vaughn and all of our other road warriors who are out there, that sense of relief was kind of the same across the country. But this idea that we have not heard from Mueller, yes, it's helped Republicans gain a little bit more trust and respect for him. But for Democratic-leaning voters, they want to hear his own summary of his own report. Take a listen to what one of the men in this diner told me as the report was coming out yesterday.
It's all got to come out. I would be very happy to see Robert Mueller come and testify. And if Robert Mueller says, the summary that the Attorney General Barr put out reflects the tone of the report, fine. That would be great. This is about the fundamental protections of our government, and this needs to be thoroughly finished. And then let us move on to actual policy that's affecting people day to day.
So look, it's two-pronged. It's what Garrett said, where Democrats and Democratic strategists and operatives have been saying this to me for the past year and a half now. They're not out here to campaign on Robert Mueller because, frankly, that's not what most voters say is top of their list as a most important issue. But at the same time, I think Democratic voters also feel that they want transparency on this. And even in talking to that same voter this morning over text, he said that the obstruction piece of the Mueller investigation, everything that we've learned yesterday and overnight, that's the thing that he wants to make sure that we really do drill down on, because he doesn't want this idea of what Trump says as old news in this report to be lost in the shuffle, because they do have some concerns still about that obstruction piece before we actually get to moving on.
Foreign interference cannot get lost in the shuffle. We tell every American that every vote counts, and we need to ensure that that is the case. Vaughn, take me to Iowa. What's the sentiment there?
Yes, Stephanie, this is a county here. We're in Council Bluffs, where we spent the last 24 hours. This is a county that voted for Donald Trump by 21 percentage points. And over the last 24 hours, the word frustration was the word that just kept coming up with voter after Republican voter. I want to let you hear from Mick Boots. This is part of what he told us yesterday.
That they haven't found anything. It would be great if we just quit looking and start moving on, because we have other matters. We have infrastructure that needs to be checked. We have the border issue that needs to be fixed. We have other problems in negotiations with China. We need to come together as Americans. We need to come together as a people that we all have the same problems, no matter whether we're Republican or Democrat.
Stephanie, and there's actually one other individual that I want to tell you about. Her name is Joyce Tetromanis. I actually called her up. She lives just outside of Circleville, Ohio. I first met Joyce back in February of 2017, right after Michael Flynn resigned. Donald Trump was actually the first time she had voted Democrat her entire life, and for the first time she did not vote for a Democrat. Instead, she wrote in the name John McCain. I called her up this morning 2 years later and asked her the very question of where her support lies now, and she said that based on this Democratic field, she is looking at it that she supports this president more than she did when she first talked to me 2 years, believing that when it comes to ISIS, when it believes to the economy, that the president has performed. And she said, well, the Mueller report, may be unflattering and it may show a man that lacks ethics. She said at the same time, for the reason why she felt like places like Ohio turned to him was because he was a businessman. And that's how a businessman operates. And what the Mueller report outlined was not that of an individual operating as a politician, but somebody that was trying to get stuff done for the good of the country.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.